Millionaire comes home early, catches wife abusing maid's black daughter. His response stuns everyone. He thought it would be just another ordinary evening. A long day at the office, an early finish, and finally some time to surprise his family with dinner reservations. But when he stepped into his grand, quiet home, something felt wrong. The laughter he expected wasn't there. The usual warmth of his mansion felt cold. Then, from down the hallway, he heard it, harsh, sharp sounds, like the crack of something against the floor, followed by muffled cries. He froze. His heart pounded, each step heavier than the last as he moved closer. The cries grew clearer, pleas, small and broken, the kind of sound no child should ever make. And then, he saw it. There, in the living room, stood his wife. Her face twisted in anger, her voice raised in words too cruel to repeat. And beneath her, helpless, curled on the ground, was the young daughter of their maid. A little girl who had done nothing but be in the wrong place at the wrong time. His wife's foot struck again, without mercy. Time seemed to stop. This was the woman he had trusted, the woman he thought he knew. His world tilted, torn between disbelief and fury. Why would she unleash such cruelty? And on a child who was innocent, defenseless, and guilty only of being born into a skin color his wife apparently despised? He stood frozen in the doorway, torn between shock and rage. He wanted to scream, to stop it immediately, but he also wanted answers. Why was this happening in his own home, behind closed doors, when he wasn't supposed to be there? What he did next would not only change his marriage, his family, and his fortune, it would shake an entire community. Because once the truth came out, there would be no going back. This isn't just a story about a man's discovery. It's about a decision that would reveal the hidden face of prejudice in the unlikeliest of places. And the question remains, when confronted with such evil in his own home, what choice could he possibly make? Michael Harrington was a man who seemed to have it all. At just 45, he was the kind of figure people admired from a distance and envied up close. A self-made millionaire, he had built his empire from the ground up, turning a small tech startup into one of the most successful firms in the city. With wealth came the mansion on the hill, the luxury cars in the driveway, and the carefully polished image of a perfect family. To the outside world, Michael's life looked untouchable, like something out of a magazine. But behind the glittering exterior, Michael had always been someone grounded. He never forgot the neighborhood he grew up in, where his mother worked double shifts as a nurse and his father struggled to keep the lights on. Maybe that was why he treated the staff in his home with more kindness than most people in his position. To him, they weren't just employees. They were human beings with families, struggles, and stories of their own. His wife, Caroline, saw things differently. Raised in privilege, she had grown accustomed to viewing service staff as little more than background figures in her life. She carried herself with elegance, her every word calculated, her every smile rehearsed. Most in their circle adored her charm, but Michael had begun to notice cracks, moments when her words cut deeper than they should, when her patience with a maid, Angela, seemed less like firmness and more like disdain. Angela was a quiet woman, hardworking and devoted. She had worked for the Harringtons for nearly 5 years, balancing her duties with the responsibility of raising her young daughter, Layla. The little girl had become something of a shadow in the house, always careful, always polite, often retreating into corners with a coloring book while her mother worked. Michael had a soft spot for her. He saw in Layla the innocence of childhood that wealth and privilege couldn't buy. Sometimes, after long meetings, he would sit with her in the kitchen, listening as she eagerly told him about her favorite stories or proudly showed him her drawings. Caroline, however, never looked at Layla the same way. There was a stiffness in her eyes whenever the child was around. Subtle, almost hidden, but they're all the same. Michael had brushed it off before, telling himself he was imagining things. But deep down, he sensed a tension, something unspoken between his wife and the maid's daughter that made the air in the house heavy. On that particular evening, Michael left the office earlier than usual. His staff assumed it was to catch up on rest, but the truth was far more thoughtful. He wanted to surprise Caroline with dinner plans. Life had been busy, and their marriage, though stable on the surface, had begun to feel distant. He thought a gesture might bridge the growing gap. As he drove home through the fading sunlight, he imagined her smile when he walked through the door unexpectedly. But when he pulled into the driveway, he noticed something odd. The house, usually filled with music or television noise, was quiet. Too quiet. He stepped inside, the click of his shoes echoing through the marble foyer. The air felt heavy, almost still, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. He set down his briefcase, listening, straining for any sign of life. And then he heard it. Not laughter, not voices, but a sound sharp enough to make his stomach tighten, a crack, followed by a muffled whimper. He frowned, moving toward the hallway, his instincts on edge. Each step carried him closer, the noise growing clearer. He paused outside the living room door. His mind raced through possibilities. An accident, an argument, but as the cries grew louder, small and broken, he knew this wasn't something ordinary. He pushed the door open just enough to see. What he found would shatter everything he thought he knew about his home, his marriage, and the woman he had promised to love forever. Michael's breath caught in his throat as the scene unfolded before him. His wife, his elegant, poised Caroline, was towering over a trembling little girl, her face twisted in rage he had never seen before. Layla, the maid's daughter, cowered on the polished wooden floor, clutching her arms over her head as Caroline's foot came down again, sharp and merciless. Michael's entire body went rigid. For a split second, he convinced himself his eyes were lying, that stress or exhaustion was playing tricks on him. But then came the sound, Layla's muffled sob, the kind that carried both fear and resignation. This wasn't the cry of a child who had tripped or stumbled. This was pain. Real. Terrifying. Undeniable. His chest tightened, a storm of emotions crashing over him. Shock. Anger. Disbelief. How could this be happening here? In his house, under his roof. He had built a life that was supposed to be safe, respectable, good. And yet here, hidden behind the closed doors of wealth, something cruel and ugly was festering. Caroline barked words at the girl, venom lacing every syllable. Words that revealed the truth Michael had ignored for too long. The disdain in her voice wasn't just for Layla being a child in the wrong place. It was for who Layla was. The color of her skin. The blood in her veins. Caroline's rage wasn't just punishment. It was prejudice, sharpened into a weapon and unleashed on the most innocent target imaginable. Michael's fists clenched at his sides, nails biting into his palms. He wanted to burst into the room, to tear Caroline away, to scoop the little girl into his arms and shield her. But his legs stayed rooted. He was paralyzed, not with fear of Caroline, but with the shattering weight of realization. This wasn't a momentary outburst. This was who his wife truly was, a part of her he had never wanted to see but could no longer ignore. Layla whimpered, curling into herself. Michael's heart broke at the sight. He remembered the afternoon she'd proudly shown him her drawings, the way her laughter echoed in the kitchen when Angela told her a joke, the quiet kindness she carried everywhere she went. And now, here she was, reduced to tears and bruises by the woman who should have been protecting her, if not as family, then at least as a human being. Angela was nowhere in sight. Had Caroline sent her away? Or was she working elsewhere in the house, unaware of the nightmare unfolding just feet away? Michael's mind raced with questions, but the one pounding hardest in his chest was clear. What do I do now? He could confront Caroline immediately, explode with the fury clawing inside him. But then what? Would she deny it? Would she twist the truth as she so often did in social circles, smiling while stabbing with words? Or should he wait, gather proof, make sure no one could dismiss what he had seen with his own eyes? The weight of choice pressed down on him, but the clock was ticking. Each second Caroline's cruelty continued was another scar on Layla's body, another wound on her spirit. He couldn't stand by. And yet, as he took a step forward, the creak of the floorboard betrayed him. Caroline's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto his. For the briefest moment, silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Her expression shifted, shock, then a cold, calculating glare. "Michael," she said, her voice smooth now, almost mocking. The kind of tone that carried no shame, no remorse, just defiance, as though she had been caught not in cruelty, but in control. Layla whimpered again, shrinking further into the corner. Michael's gaze met hers, and in those wide, tear-filled eyes, he saw everything: terror, desperation, and a silent plea for rescue. His decision could no longer wait. The time for hesitation was over. What he chose to do next would ignite a storm, one that would tear through his marriage, his reputation, and the fragile illusion of perfection he had built. And once that storm began, there would be no stopping it. The silence between them felt heavier than the walls of the mansion itself. Michael stood in the doorway, frozen, as Caroline's sharp glare met his. Layla still whimpered in the corner, her small body trembling, her tiny arms wrapped around herself as though she could hide from the world. For years, Michael had believed his home was a sanctuary, a place of love, respect, and safety. In that instant, the illusion shattered like glass beneath a hammer. The truth was raw, exposed, and searing. His wife wasn't just cold or distant, she was cruel. She was hateful. And she was capable of harming a child simply because of the color of her skin. Michael's pulse thundered in his ears. He stepped forward, his voice low but firm. Enough. Caroline didn't flinch. She straightened, her eyes narrowing, as though daring him to challenge her. This girl has no place here, she spat, her tone dripping with venom. Her mother should know her boundaries. And so should you. The words struck him like a slap. Caroline wasn't apologetic. She wasn't embarrassed. She was doubling down, standing proudly in her prejudice. Michael's heart burned with fury, but more than that, disgust. He crossed the room quickly, kneeling beside Layla. The child flinched at first, expecting another strike, but when she realized it was him, her wide eyes filled with relief. Michael gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice soft now, trembling with emotion. You're safe. No one will hurt you again. Caroline scoffed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Safe. Don't be ridiculous, Michael. She doesn't belong here. She never did. I was only doing what her mother should have done long ago, keeping her in her place. Michael turned his head, his eyes narrowing at his wife. Rage surged through him, but beneath it lay heartbreak. This was the woman he had once vowed to love and cherish. And yet, standing before him now, she was a stranger filled with poison. He rose to his feet, positioning himself between Caroline and the child. For the first time in their marriage, there was no trace of compromise in his stance. His voice, though quiet, cut through the air like steel. If this is who you truly are, then you don't belong in my life. Not anymore. Caroline's face twisted, a flicker of disbelief crossing her features. She had always believed she controlled the narrative, that her charm and status would shield her from consequences. But the look in Michael's eyes told her otherwise. This was no longer her stage to command. At that moment, Angela burst into the room. She froze as she took in the scene, her daughter trembling on the floor, Michael standing protectively, Caroline's rage simmering in the air. Her hand flew to her mouth, a strangled sob escaping. Angela rushed to Layla, cradling her tightly, tears streaking down her cheeks. Michael's chest ached at the sight. No child should ever have to endure such cruelty. No mother should ever have to walk in on this nightmare. Caroline, however, stood unmoved. Her arms crossed, her chin lifted as though she were the victim, as though she were the one wronged. Oh, don't look at me like that, she hissed at Angela. You should be grateful I've kept you both here this long. The room went still. Michael's fury erupted, no longer restrained. Get out, he thundered, his voice shaking the very walls. For the first time in years, Caroline faltered, her mask slipping. She opened her mouth, searching for a retort, but none came. Angela held Layla close, rocking her gently, whispering reassurances. Michael turned to them, his heart breaking at the bruises forming on the child's skin. He knew this was the moment that would define everything. Not his money, not his status, not his polished image. But what he chose to do, right here, right now. He had a choice: protect the facade of a perfect marriage, or destroy it by exposing the ugly truth. And deep down, he knew there was no choice at all. This was no longer about him. It was about justice. It was about doing what was right, no matter the cost. And so, as Caroline's cold stare bore into him, Michael made a silent vow. He would not let this cruelty stay hidden. He would not let prejudice poison his home any longer. The storm had broken, and nothing would ever be the same. The house that once gleamed with polish and wealth now felt like a crime scene. Not of theft, not of intrusion, but of something darker, hate. Michael stood firm, his chest rising and falling as Caroline's glare burned into him. But her fire no longer held power over him. The illusion of the woman he thought he loved had been shattered forever, replaced by the reality of someone he could no longer recognize. Angela's sobs filled the room as she held her daughter close, whispering words of comfort only a mother could speak. Layla clung to her little fingers digging into her mother's blouse, her tiny frame trembling against the woman who had always been her safe place. Michael's heart twisted as he watched them. They should never have needed saving, not like this. Not in his home. Caroline broke the silence, her voice sharp, almost taunting. So this is it? You're going to throw everything away for a servant and her child? Do you realize what people will say? What they'll think of us? Michael's response was steady, resolute. I don't care what people think anymore. I care about what's right. For once, Caroline seemed unsettled. Her confidence cracked, her eyes narrowing as she tried to calculate her next move. But Michael had already made his. The line had been drawn, and there was no erasing it. He turned to Angela. Take Layla upstairs. Pack your things. Tonight, you leave here, not because you've done anything wrong, but because I won't let either of you suffer another moment in this house. Angela looked at him, eyes wide, torn between gratitude and disbelief. Mr. Harrington, we have nowhere. You'll stay with me, Michael interrupted softly. Not as staff. As people who deserve respect, safety, and dignity. I'll make sure you have everything you need. Tears filled Angela's eyes as she nodded, clutching her daughter tighter. Layla looked up at Michael with eyes so full of pain yet glimmers of hope, and for the first time that night, he saw a flicker of peace return to her expression. Caroline's voice rose again, shrill with desperation. You can't be serious, Michael. You'd destroy your own family over them. Michael turned slowly, his gaze cold, unyielding. No, Caroline. You destroyed this family the moment you raised your hand against a child. The moment you revealed who you truly are. The words cut deeper than any blade, and for the first time, Caroline had no retort. She stood frozen, her power crumbling, her kingdom collapsing around her. Within hours, Michael made calls, first to a trusted friend in law enforcement, then to a lawyer. He wasn't going to bury this. He wasn't going to let Caroline's actions fade quietly into the night. Documentation was made. Witness statements prepared. Even the household staff, who had long endured Caroline's sharp tongue, came forward, confirming what Michael now knew. Her cruelty wasn't new. It had only found its most vulnerable victim that night. News spread quickly. At first whispers in the city's social circles, then headlines in the press. Millionaire stands against racism in his own home. Reporters clamored for statements, but Michael didn't speak for publicity. He spoke because silence was complicity. In a televised interview, his voice carried the same quiet power he had used that night. Wealth means nothing if it blinds us to humanity. My wife's actions were cruel, racist, and inexcusable. I will not stand beside hate, not in my home, not in my life, not in this world. And neither should you. The impact was immediate. Some of his peers whispered about scandal, but many more applauded his courage. His company's employees, many of whom came from diverse backgrounds, felt a surge of pride knowing their leader had chosen integrity over image. Communities that had long felt invisible saw a glimmer of hope, proof that those with privilege and power could stand on the side of justice. As for Angela and Layla, their lives changed forever. With Michael's support, Angela no longer had to work in servitude. He helped her pursue her own dreams, something she had once thought impossible. Layla began to heal, her laughter slowly returning, her drawings brighter than before. She carried scars, yes, but she also carried a new truth, that even in the darkest moments, there are those who will fight for what's right. Caroline, stripped of her status and shield, faced consequences. Not only divorce, but public disgrace. Her name, once spoken with admiration, became a cautionary tale. She had thought her cruelty would remain hidden, but Michael's choice ensured it would never again be ignored. And through it all, Michael carried the weight of that night. He knew he couldn't undo what had happened, couldn't erase Layla's fear or Angela's pain. But he also knew that silence had never been an option. To turn away, to excuse, to cover up, that would have been the true betrayal. This story wasn't just about one man's decision in his mansion. It was about the choices we all face when confronted with injustice. Do we stay silent, preserving our comfort, or do we risk everything to do what's right? Michael chose. And in choosing, he reminded the world of something simple but powerful. Racism survives in silence, but it shatters in the light. And so the question remains, for every viewer, for every listener, for every person who hears this story, when the moment comes and injustice stares you in the face, will you have the courage to speak? Or will you turn away? Because sometimes, the greatest wealth we have isn't in our bank accounts, it's in our humanity. And that's the one thing we cannot afford to lose.